Roger, they want.
Sorry, I'm working on it. Yep, there we go.
Commissioner Dalton.
Here.
Commissioner Light.
Here.
Commissioner Callahan.
Here.
Commissioner Bauer.
Here.
Commissioner Walters.
Here.
And Chair Kilroy.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, I forget. How do we salute the flag?
Actually,
Well, we can do it one of two ways. The city council, sometimes it's awkward. They stand up and they do the Pledge of Allegiance to a flag that's there. But if you'd like to, we could just sort of say there we go. Hey,
Wow, that's awesome.
Awesome.
someone's got way more talent than I have. So if you want to do the Pledge of Allegiance, we can certainly do that.
All right, so we can all join in together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
There we go. Now we're official. Can I have a motion to approve the order of agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, we need a roll call
Roll
vote.
call.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, we had the roll call.
Oh, did you want me to
but
conduct it?
we need a vote on every action. We have to do it by roll call. You can't do it by
okay.
just acclamation.
Got it.
So could I please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Carlson.
Approved.
Commissioner Dalton.
Approved.
Commissioner Light.
Concur.
Commissioner Callahan.
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer.
Approved.
Commissioner Walters.
Approved.
And Chair Kilroy.
Approved.
Thank you.
If I remember, Zoom's got that little hand thumbs up thing. They should, and I imagine this has been part of new regulations coming down from the state of California. They should have just approved the thumbs up. Blue folder items. I imagine we don't have any blue folder items.
That is correct. There are no blue folder items tonight.
All right, so consent calendar. So the consent calendar is going to be approved in one motion unless something is pulled, and then it will be acted on separately. The consent calendar tonight consists of the affidavit for posting and the June 1st minutes. Does anybody want anything pulled from the consent calendar?
No.
Don't know on that, I don't believe. Could I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Could I please have a roll call vote for the approval of the consent calendar?
Commissioner Carlson. Commissioner Dalton.
Approved.
Commissioner Light.
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan.
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer.
Approved.
Commissioner Walters.
Approved.
And Chair Kilroy.
Approved.
Thank you.
Okay, so public participation on non-agenda items. So this is a time for someone to come and speak, or by email, I guess, on any subject not on the agenda. Is there anyone or any emails that we need to read into the record?
We do have
Actually,
no, oops, excuse me. I'll leave that to,
Vicki. So Mark Hansen's I don't know if he's in the waiting room or I'm not sure if you're going to have to put him into the meeting so that he can, I don't know if he wants to speak on this item. I think he's sort of testing it, so you might want to bring him in and see if he'd like to speak.
I have allowed the one speaker with the phone number ending in 629 into the meeting.
Okay.
I've
And
sent,
he would have to raise his hand if he would like to speak.
and there is no indication that he is doing that.
Okay.
So can I conclude then that we don't have any public participation for non-agenda items?
It appears
Correct.
so. There's nothing in e-comment as well.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we don't have any items continued from previous agenda. And so we have our quarterly public safety report. Take it away.
All right, Commissioner. So I'm not sure when the last quarter was we did this, given that we missed a few meetings in there, and then when we were finally able to reconvene last month, we spent most of our focus on the budget. But we do have Captain Joe Hoffman from the police department is here to provide us with their quarterly update. And then I believe we are going to have a representative of the fire department here as well. I don't know if that's the item that's labeled staff computer or not. So hopefully someone from the fire department will pop on here in a minute and be able to provide their update. So maybe Joe, want to get us started on an update on what's happening, Marine Enforcement Unit, as well as any other thing you'd like to brief us on that's going on in the police department. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you very much for having us here tonight. So we've actually had quite a bit going with the Maritime Enforcement Unit over the past quarter. You know, with the weather picking up, we've had the guys out there a lot more. I think you have the stats there, but just to go over kind of just the second quarter stats, they had 32 vessel stops, and in those included 13 rules of the road. They had 18 contacts for personal flotation devices, actually one illegal launching, 19 for swimming, which has been an issue with people jumping off of the old sport fishing pier into the water there. That's been a very frequent occurrence lately that they've been focusing on. They had 9 contacts for registration violations, 3 for anchorage, 18 for people fishing in an improper area. And then the high stat there is the public assist, which is in the second quarter alone, there was 38 public assists. The arrests also encounter the stuff that occurs waterside and landside, but over the second quarter, there were 13 arrests, 21 citations, 5 field interview cards, and a total of 91 reports. A couple of reports that I wanted to draw attention to was during the month of June, the Maritime Enforcement Union actually had 2 separate stolen vessel issues that they worked on. And the officers assigned down there using department resources and mutual aid from outside, they were actually able to track down both of those vessels, recover both vessels, and arrest suspects in both cases, which is one of the advantages there of having the law enforcement down on the water is being able to have those arrest powers and actually recover 2 boats, which made the victims very happy there. Two other things that I want to draw attention to, if I could, is you may remember that back in August of 2019, we signed an MOU with the El Segundo Police Department. So El Segundo officers could come down and work on the boat in a part-time basis. There's no minimum hours or anything. It's just an opportunity for station that are willing to go through the training to come down and get some additional experience. On June 2nd, the City Council approved a similar MOU for the Manhattan Beach Police Department. So Manhattan could now come down and work on the boat with Redondo people. They're not allowed to take the boat out by themselves, but they're considered an extra officer or extra personnel on the boat that are trained as deckheads. They're going to go through the same course over in LA Port that's going to give them the experience to work on the boat as a deckhand and learn how the boat operates. And they conducted some training recently over the past couple of weeks where Manhattan officers came down. And then on Friday, for the very first time, because there's a 2-officer minimum to operate the boat, we only had 1 officer on duty, and we were able to have Manhattan come down and be the 2nd officer. So instead of the boat staying in the slip, we were able to get the boat out on the water with 1 Redondo and 1 Manhattan officer, which was the first time that we had that joint operation there, which was very, very good to see that come to fruition. A few other things that I wanted to bring up is that we've been working hard to keep the boat operational. And in 2018, we applied for a grant through the State Homeland Security Grant Program. And we received notice today. In fact, I have the letter here. It's kind of cool since we're doing the Zoom stuff. Let's see if I can pull that up. See if I can make this work here. Hopefully you can see that. So we got this letter today indicating that we received $70,199 in order to get 2 brand new engines for the boat and the new collar, which is the exterior portion of the boat that assists with how the boat stays afloat and everything else. So that was a good news item. And then we're also applying for a grant for $10,000 to purchase dive gear, because our officers, the 4 officers that are assigned full-time down there, have been dive certified now and can assist with any sort of recovery operation, evidence searches, inspections, anything that may require any sort of dive operation. In an effort to showcase the unit and what they're doing and provide more communication with the public, we recently instituted and had approved a social media page for the Maritime Enforcement Unit. I wanted to share that with you too. So you can see here that they started a Instagram page that has various public safety. You can see here, there's one talking about the dive certification that they went through, informational video with safety tips from July 4th. So, and then if you go to Instagram and you go there, you can see all the different posts they've had. They've been involved with some of the local businesses, with Dive and Surf, with some giveaways and some other things. And it's just an opportunity to promote all the different areas that they're working in and things that they have exposure in. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you was a video from July 4th from one of our officers' body cameras. I mean, this is something that the Fire Department Harbor Patrol does all the time, and they've been doing it forever. Our officers have just recently been out on the water more, and even though these occur on a regular basis, they aren't often captured on video. And our officers are equipped with body cameras, since City Council approved the body cameras. So I just had a quick 30-second video that I wanted to show you, where our officers were out in front of the pier area. They observed somebody on a jet ski that got caught in the chop out there, and it launched them off, and the officers were able to provide assistance and pull the person from the water, and it was all captured on the body camera. I want to show it to you. So needless to say, he had some minor injuries to his hand. The officer said he was pretty shaken up. He took quite a spill in the water. The Sea-Doo was getting away from him. The ocean was rough. Probably would have been tough for him to get there. I was very impressed when I saw the video. I told the officers that if I tried to do that, they probably would have pulled me in, and then they would have had to save 2 people. But fortunately, he was a big, strong officer, and he was able to kind of just pull him right out of the water there. So those days are over for me. Anyway, so we've had a lot going on. I actually was able to go out with them on 4th of July for a couple hours, and it was nice seeing the support from the community, and we're excited to be working with the other agencies now, and looking forward to a fun and safe summer, and making as many contributions as we can to keeping all the residents in Redondo Beach and the boating community safe. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Well, that's right. I think as a reminder for questions or wanting to speak, we were doing a thumbs up or something on the little reactions. Commissioner Callahan?
My question is, the drone and the social media page that was done, Who did that?
Well, we started it obviously as a police department based on our other social media pages after coordination with the city attorney's office. And we have a social media team at the police department, and we designate certain officers. We give them a city phone and access to the city created social media pages. So this one is actually being the content's mostly created by one of the officers who is assigned to the Maritime Enforcement Unit with oversight by the supervision for that unit.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Chair Kilroy, Chair Kilroy, just as an operational issue, if down on the bottom of the screen there's a button that says participants, it'll raise a box on the side and it'll give opportunities for people to raise their hand if they want to speak. So that's another way that you could acknowledge it, just as a reminder. I think we used that last month, but just as a reminder.
Right. I remember something about the hands, but I forgot about the participants box.
Yeah, so that's the one. If you just click on that, and if anybody is interested in speaking, they can click on that, and there's an opportunity then to raise your hand.
Thanks for that reminder. So we've got Commissioner Carlson. I'm just doing it in order. I apologize if it's not in the order that you guys actually raised your hands.
Thanks. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the report. 2 questions. How many hours a month are you using the boat roughly? Last we heard, and this is I think January, the boat was out of commission for service. So I'm just kind of wondering what happened between then and now and how much it's getting used now.
Yeah, unfortunately, the information you got in January wasn't entirely accurate. It was actually down for service for a period of about 7 or 8 days. The bigger challenge was the staffing in the police department and the season. So now that we're into the season, I mean, Memorial Day to Labor Day is what we consider the period of the year when we're going to have the most activity in the harbor, and we want to make sure we get the boat out there as often as possible. So we do have 7-day-a-week coverage with the boat team. However, with the current structure, they're not only assigned to the boat. They still have a responsibility to handle calls in the entire pier and harbor area, which includes the pier, the beach, North Harbor Drive, and the adjacent businesses. So I have asked them to try to have the boat on the water for a minimum of 4 hours a day. More would be better, but we do have other responsibilities from a patrol standpoint. But the good news is that it is their primary focus. And patrol understands that. And patrol understands that they're going to have to assist with the land-based calls down in that area, especially on the weekends when we're going to have the most activity there. And it's most important for us to have the officers out on the water.
So, second question, I'm just wondering how the outboards are performing on that boat. I mean, it's great that the state's paying for replacement ones. Is this we've had that boat for 3 or 4 years? I'm just wondering if this is like the first set of outboards, if you can estimate how many hours we got on them.
I'm not sure how many hours are on them, but I do know that the engines were used when we got them. So, yeah, they were rebuilt motors from the time that we purchased them. And I'm not sure how many hours. Let me ask, I got the officers here. Do you know how many hours are on them?
A little over 400 on each.
So he's saying that there's a little bit of over 400 hours on each that's on the boat. And that's after the rebuild. So that's why we applied for the grant, because it's a significant cost. And it's taken a couple of years, but we're very pleased that finally got approved so we can keep that boat in tip-top shape.
Great. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Light.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Appreciate it. I'm interested. I got 2 questions. The first is, how did you track down those boats, and where were they? The ones that were stolen.
Did you guys get those? I'm gonna turn the camera here to Officer Dos Santos, who's the one that actually tracked it down and made the arrest. So that way you don't have to hear it secondhand from me. Let's see, there you go.
Hi, everybody. It's my partner, Officer Soden. As soon as we got that information out, like any information we get, we love to reach out to our partners because the ocean is giant. So we use the information given. We got the CF number, pictures of the boats that we had, and we actually gave that to the MCC, which is the Maritime Communication Center, and they basically put that information out to our partners. One of the vessels was located in Long Beach. near, right, actually close to their police station, which was actually kind of funny. So as soon as they were able to detain the boat and the occupant, we took over and we were able to recover that boat. It just happened to be one of those times where it was a sketchy, almost like offer-up situation where he was trying to sell the boat, but didn't do his, background check on the person. And the other one, similar, we got the information out to our local agencies, the LA Sheriffs, right next door in the marina. And similar to that, they were able to locate the boat. They called us immediately. I don't think Officer Soda and I were working that day, but we relayed that information to the officers that were working that day on the boat. And same situation, we were able to get them back. So we're very knit with all the agencies in the area, primarily Long Beach, the LA Sheriffs, and LA Port. So if there's a chance that anything gets taken from our harbor, it's going either north or south. And we'll just give them a call and be like, hey guys, just a heads up, we just had this, can you let us know? And both of the boats were actually recovered within a couple of days, which is pretty good. And they seem to be functioning correctly. So a good indication for that too is when vessels like that get taken, they're actually, rather than just being used for leisure, like if someone steals a car, they're used for smuggling. So as soon as any kind of vessel is taken, and it's especially like a pleasure craft or sailboat or something like that, where it doesn't necessarily look sketchy per se because it's so well maintained, smugglers will use that to try and bring over drugs and humans and things like that. So our federal allies like Homeland Security, Border Patrol, FBI, and DEA also get notified of that, and they're updated. That way we can get trends and document that. That way we know what to look out for and what the current trends are with that. So that's basically it, unless there's a follow-up question.
Great job. What kind of boats were they?
One was a 30-foot pleasure craft. It was a big cruiser cabin. If you go on the Redondo Beach Instagram page, you can see a picture of it. We did block out the CF number so that you couldn't really go and ask him, what happened to your boat? And another one similar, I think it was a 24-foot sail vessel with a single engine on it too. So one was a pleasure cruiser cabin, and the other one was a big sailboat. So it's different. It's not all the same. It's not like, your regular kind of boat, but it was big enough to where we took it on and we called them real fast and we got a good response. So we're just really happy to get those people their boats back in the property.
Yeah, that's great. Did the owners leave the keys on it, or did they hotwire them, or?
Just one person, from what I can recall, one person had a set of spare keys nearby, like somewhere on the boat, and the person, I guess, must have stumbled upon it. And the other one, I'm not too sure because I wasn't working that day, but I can get that information to you folks.
I just wondered. That's just great job.
Like we all know, all the mariners on here, a lot of times the boats are left unlocked and open, and it's very easy to access. As long as you get a hold of that ignition set, and who knows, all it takes is a fork to get you running. So we really strive to add that extra patrol in the area, especially during the late evening hours and early morning hours, to make sure there's nobody like casing or anything like that, to see, make sure nobody's not where there's not supposed to be, to prevent that from the future. So.
Okay, thank you. So my second question, I know that was a lot, but my second subject of questions is, we walked down to the harbor and we wanted to dine outside. Noticed it was packed with people not wearing masks, and we didn't really feel comfortable. Is Redondo PD not enforcing masks? What's the enforcement policy?
I wouldn't say that we're not enforcing masks. I would say that there's obviously going to be discretion when it comes to any sort of enforcement. And I think that we give the officers the discretion to go with an educational approach if they choose to. And we've also given all the officers masks. And I witnessed that myself on 4th of July, where if we came upon somebody that wasn't wearing a mask, we actually have individual package masks. I have one I could show you. They're wrapped in individual little plastic bags, and we can hand the masks out. As far as the enforcement, that would be an option. So I wouldn't say that it's not allowed, but I do not believe that there has been very much, if any, actual citations written for the enforcement of a mask, as opposed to the educational and information standpoint with the mask being provided in support of that.
Okay. Well, I know it's tough when people are eating, you can't have the mask on, but this was blatant, people just walking around. It was kind of disturbing because people would just walk up to the restaurant, put on the mask at the last second, get seated, and then take it back off. And I did see 3 officers walking together go by and there was tons of people and nobody got confronted, and I didn't want to make a scene, so I didn't say anything, but I just wondered what the enforcement policy is in Redondo.
Yeah, it's a challenging situation for sure when it comes to enforcement of these orders that seem to change on a regular basis. And we would never say that an officer is not allowed to enforce it, and we would never say that they have to enforce every single time, because there's so many different sets of circumstances that would make a citation be reasonable or not reasonable. But generally speaking, if you were asking me how I would do it, which is all I can really speak for, is I would say that the educational approach, providing information, offering a mask to somebody, and giving a very brief description of why it would be beneficial would be where I start. And if there was met with some sort of hostility or there was a continued repeat offense, then it could escalate to the point where a citation would be the most appropriate course of action.
So LA County is going to mandatory enforcement. Does that affect us?
No, I don't believe so. I suppose it would depend on what exactly they're going to be, the enforcement's going to be for.
I was just watching the news before this, and they said if they catch you outside without a mask and it's in around close to other people, it's hundreds of dollars of fine that you will be fined. And that was both for the city and for the county. And there was a little sign flashing along the bottom of the screen that gave, Santa Monica, I forget, 2 other cities that it's saying you will get fined hundreds of dollars. But we don't have, obviously, it sounds like we don't have anything like that.
I haven't received any information about any sort of mandatory enforcement order that would be affecting Redondo Beach at this point. And if something like that were to come down, we'd coordinate with the city attorney's office and make sure that everything that was being told to us would be in line with the city municipal codes and the enforcement practices that we would be encouraging. But I haven't heard anything like that yet.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
That's all.
thank you, Commissioner Light. Commissioner Dalton.
All right. Yeah, Chief, I just want to say right now, tough time for the police all over. I really appreciate your presence, your officers in the harbor. I think you do a heck of a great job, and keep it up. You got my vote. I do have one question on the operation. The MOUs with El Segundo and Manhattan, will that offset any of the costs of operating our boat here in Redondo?
Well, actually, it will. They don't contribute funding for the maintenance or any of the equipment. However, the perfect example would be last Friday, where we normally have 2 officers assigned. One was unable to be here on Friday, so the boat would have had to stay in the slip. But Manhattan Beach was able to send an officer down, and we didn't have to pay for that salary of that officer. Manhattan Beach pays for that salary. So if we wanted to get the boat out on the water, we would have had to hire one of the other officers that's trained as a deckhand or a boat captain and pay them overtime, which could be a substantial cost out of the police department operating budget. So in this case, it did save us money in the sense that the boat went out and it didn't cost us anything else, as opposed to the boat wouldn't have gone out that day. So okay. There is some offsetting costs there from a personnel standpoint. However, they do not contribute to the maintenance or the equipment.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Director Proud, I guess we're on to, I see our fire chief is here. I think I got a hand raised. Do I need to ask for public?
Actually, if the chief is going to make a report or discuss this item, he should go first.
Right.
Great. So,
Chief, you're on.
Chief Metzger, good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. Thanks for attending. You're on to provide your update for the Harbor Patrol.
Oops. Chief, it doesn't appear that your mic is on. I think he may have gotten kicked off. Let's just give him a moment because he's actually signed in 2 different ways. Nope. There. Oh. Chief, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, but I'm going to unmute your other. Let's see if this works. Nope. His mic is on. For some reason, it's not coming through. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm so sorry. I don't have another way to get him. Let me try this.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay. Okay. Very good. I don't know if you can see me or not, but I'll proceed with my report. So it's a pleasure to be in front of you. I know it's been a while since we presented a report from the Harbor Patrol. It's really nice to see the police department's presentation on their maritime enforcement unit, and certainly Harbor Patrol welcomes their participation on the water. The more that we have out there, the better for the community. I'm convinced of that. So the report I want to give you today is only for the second quarter of 2020. And as is my norm, I'll compare that against a year ago. But you should have the data in front of you for 2020. If you really get into the sub pages of that report, you can actually pull up the second quarter yourself. But I think the one that pops up in front of you automatically is the year-to-date stuff. And that basically shows that through June of this year, we've had a total of 1,995 calls for service. But I wanted to compare just the quarter and point out a couple of interesting observations. And that is, for some particular different calls, we've seen substantial increases. Those calls include Mayday calls, which for this quarter were 61 Mayday calls, and that was an increase of 80% over last year at this same time. For illegal moorings, which is a fairly common type of call for us, at 27, this was an increase of 145%. For SUP and swimming in the harbor, and those are people who are on SUPs who decide to go swimming either voluntarily or otherwise, there was an increase at 47 to 325%. So we're certainly seeing SUP use up, or at least those who are perhaps not as proficient at in SUP use. Termination criteria, the use of PFDs. We saw at 41 sites, we had, or 41 observations of that where we intervened. That was an increase of 215%. And the last separate item I wanted to bring up was just 15 instances of hazard to navigation, which was 150% increase over this time last year. So overall, just for this quarter in 2020, we've shown an increase of 40% over the over the 814 total calls for service back in 2019. I would point out, I have no idea if this is significant or not, but we are in the height of this COVID-19 experience. We don't know whether or not that has a direct impact on the number of interactions we've had with the public. It's just an observation that we're making. During this quarter, we did have a couple of significant things to report. Certainly the biggest one in May was that large fish kill that occurred in the marina due to the red tide. Multiple agencies were involved here, including not only the Harbor Patrol, Public Works, I believe the police had their boat involved. We had 4 separate marinas that were actively involved in helping mitigate the cleanup, and the lifeguards were involved in this multi-day cleanup. So that harkened back to the fish kill just before I came to Redondo Beach. It was certainly a different cause, but it took a lot of people working together and coordinating their efforts to get this mitigated. And the only other thing of real interest was in just this last month, we did have a houseboat that sunk in its slip. We had a number of agencies respond, including the lifeguards, to assist the Harbor Patrol with lifting that boat and towing it over to the boatyard so it could be serviced. So that completes my report. I don't have any videos to show you. Wish I did, but I will entertain any questions you might have.
Chair Kilroy, you're on mute. Chair Kilroy, still on mute. There we go.
Commissioner Light, I presume that's a new hand.
Yeah, sorry, no, that's an old hand. I got to learn how to take it down. I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Dalton? You're on mute too. So I don't feel so bad. So
No questions. I have to take mine down too.
Commissioner Carlson?
Mine's a fresh hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Chief, thanks for the report. I'm not really surprised to see the increase in your business. Are you seeing? I'm curious. Do you get the sense that it's there's generally an increase in traffic over last year, or is it just people who are new to the water and making more mistakes?
So if I'm speaking with my Harbor Patrol people, they're getting the sense that this has more to do with people who are less familiar with the water. So, and when we interact with them, our interactions are principally advisals, where we're helping instruct them on what they should do, what they shouldn't do, not necessarily writing up any kind of violation citations unless they are repeat offenders of this kind of thing. But by and large, we're trying to teach them the rules of the road so that they're not either getting themselves in trouble or getting any other vessel in trouble.
Thanks. Yeah, the harbor just seems really busy to me, so I'm glad you guys are down there, and I'm glad we were able to work with the city council to keep you guys reasonably funded. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from the public. Mark?
Hi, everybody. How you doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yes, part of my comment is Stephen Proud asked me to test the system tonight, so I'll type up some notes over to him, but obviously I'm able to get on here just fine and say hi. And I just want to echo Commissioner Carlson's comments. I've had across the board comments from people down at the harbor that they feel like things are busier down there. Very common comment. And, I mean, for good reason. It's something safe people can do with some social distancing, and hopefully it's going to bring some new harbor users down, and hopefully they'll stay and become ongoing active users of our harbor. So thank you to both the police department and the Harbor Patrol for keeping everybody safe out there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? So do I need a motion to receive and file?
Before you do, I just wanted to comment, or actually say there are no e-comments submitted, sir.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I guess I take a motion to receive and file.
So moved.
Second.
Could I please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Carlson?
Aye.
Commissioner Dalton? Please
You're
unmute.
muted.
Commissioner.
Approved.
Thank
There we
you.
go.
Commissioner Light?
Concur.
Commissioner Callahan?
Approve.
Commissioner Bauer?
Approve.
Commissioner Walters?
Approve.
And Chair Kilroy?
Approved.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, we're on to discussion regarding the city adopted 2021 budget
Right.
and capital improvement program.
Thanks, Chief Metzger. Thank you, Captain Hoffman. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so the next agenda item that you have tonight was, it doesn't have to be a long discussion. We had a nice long discussion at our last meeting regarding the budget. So what I just thought I would do is share a screen with you and give you just a little bit of a recap on what happened with the city council so you know where we are on a going forward basis. So let me grab, let me see here. I'm going to screen share. Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to throw on this and we're going to, all right. So hopefully you can see the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
And as you know, we started the budget process in May. The city council had 4 different meetings and workshops to discuss the budget. I appreciate the Harbor Commission coming together for a special meeting to provide your input, which we were able to present that information to the city council and what you had to say. We walked through a summary of the recommendations that you made. And they took that into consideration and took it into heart as they went through the budget process. So what you see here is really a slide that compares where we were on the proposed budget on the right-hand side, and then what was ultimately adopted by the city council. And I'll show you this for the Tidelands and for the Uplands. So on the Tidelands, what you see is on the revenue side, the funding side, the real significant number is no surprise. Seaside Lagoon is not going to be opening for this season for our traditional recreational activities. There may still be some opportunities to do private parties. There may still be some opportunities to do special events. I think that's going to all be COVID-19 dependent. So there is some projection of limited revenues, but we're seeing a reduction on the funding side of close to $600,000. Then on the expenditure side, this is really where you see the savings, and a lot of this is the result of the various decision packages that were presented to the city council for their consideration, as well as the directive from city management that the departments reduce their expenditures anywhere between 5 and 15%. And so, not surprisingly, what you see is a personnel reduction and a maintenance and operation reduction. And those two together, along with a little bit of internal service fund allocation reduction. And that internal service fund allocation, as we talked about, I think fairly extensively at our last meeting, is a formula-driven number. And so when other numbers decrease, you see that flow through the internal service fund calculation formulas. And so with the reduction of personnel and the reduction in maintenance and operation expenses, you see a corresponding flow through to the internal service fund of a little bit of savings. And so when everything was said and done, what we were able to do was shave the proposed deficit, which was originally projected to be about 1.95 million, down to 1.57 million. Still a very big number and a bit of a scary number for us on the Tidelands side. We do have fund balance on the Tidelands that will help us absorb that deficit this year. But, you know, as we start to go forward, we'll have to see how much of that remains as a structural issue and how much of that is just purely dependent upon our loss of revenues due to COVID-19. So, you know, our challenge right now is when we constructed the budget, as we talked about at our last meeting, we were assuming that we were going to see some of our businesses return to about 65% of their operating capacity. And once the COVID-19 use restrictions were lifted, we really haven't seen that yet. And then no sooner were the use restrictions lifted than they were put back into place. In some cases on a limited basis for the 4th of July weekend, in other instances more directly on some of the restaurateurs for an initial 3-week period, and we'll see how long those remain in place. I'll scroll down a little bit further here on the Uplands side. So you see a variance on the funding of an increase of $275,000, and that caught me by surprise when I first looked at these numbers. So I asked our finance department, why we saw an increase in rents and percentages. And the reason is a bit of an accounting issue. When we collect revenue from our property management company, so we use a third-party property management company to manage a fair number of our leaseholds out there, we get net revenue from them. So to the extent they have operating expenses, utility expenses, payroll expenses, things of that nature, they pay all of those, and then they pay us the net revenue. Well, you may recall last month when we were talking about the decision packages, one of our decision packages was to try to reduce our operating expenses with our third-party vendor by 15%. So rather than that showing as a reduction in expenditures, because we get it as the net, it actually shows it as an increase in revenue. Same effect, but it's a little quirky when you happen to see it in black and white. So that's what that $275,000 represents. It represents the decision package where we reduce our property management expenses. Then, as you saw on the similar side previously, personnel expenses, maintenance and operation expenses are reduced for the uplands. There's that same corresponding formulaic flow through to the internal service fund allocation. And in this case, the combination of the increased funding or the increased revenues from the reduced expenditures, as well as the true direct reduced expenditures, is a resulting decrease in our projected deficit from 1.98 million down to 1.14 million. Again, still a very big number compared to our fund balance. In this instance, the uplands, while the tidelands has a robust fund balance, the uplands fund balance is stressed. I asked our accounting department if they could, or our finance department, if they would run me a balance sheet so I could see what our current cash balance is in the uplands account. They ran that for me last Thursday, and the current cash balance in that account is $2.8 million. So we're really starting to stress the uplands account by absorbing this loss into the fund balance. Again, we'll be looking pretty hard at this throughout the year. This one we're going to be managing very closely as we go through the year. We will the tidelands as well, but in this one in particular, just because of how close we are on a cash basis, we're going to be monitoring this on a go-forward basis. Again, these revenue projections assumed that we were going to start to see our business community down in the harbor start to achieve some of their, some get back up and running, achieve some amount of revenue for which we get percentage rents, and that those revenue numbers would be anywhere between 50 and 65%, depending on the use type. We're not seeing that yet as we get into our first month of the fiscal year, July. We got off a little bit on a wrong foot with the closures happening. So that'll create a revenue challenge for us going forward. So we could see these numbers go a little bit south if it doesn't recover later into this season, or at least into the next season. The CIP, we really didn't, well, before I leave the revenue accounts, I guess I should make a note to say that, there were 9 decision packages, and I included that handout in your materials. There were 9 decision packages that were opportunities for some kind of an impact to the harbor enterprise, the uplands and tidelands funds. The city council ultimately accepted all of those decision packages as drafted, with the exception of 3 of them. Decision package number 29 was the Harbor Patrol, the reduction in staffing by approximately a third of the Harbor Patrol would have amounted to more than about $500,000. You all felt very strongly that should be a decision package rejected by the city council. There were a lot of public comments to that effect, and ultimately the city council did not approve that decision package, I think, as you all are aware. Secondarily, you had made a recommendation to the city council that for decision package number 26, which was our departmental recommendation for reductions in contracts and professional services accounts, that we not eliminate the Falconer program 100%, that we retain some level of funding for the Falcon program so that we can do maintenance activities out at the pier area and throughout King Harbor, I'm happy to say that the city council agreed with you, and we have a contract that was approved. Actually, we've already had it approved. We've negotiated it and had it approved by the city council last Tuesday night. So it's a contract for about $57,000. And the goal of that contract is to be able to buy approximately 16 hours of flying time per week. So what we've heard from Rocky, who's the falconer, is that initially his strategy is to probably go out and fly for a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the evening, multiple days a week, and then see how that bird population, the pest bird population, reacts to that. So really pleased that the city council took your recommendation on that. And then the last thing was decision package number 28, which was a decision package that would have reduced some of our public works staffing down at the pier. And the city council felt like it was important to preserve a position there. And so they restored about $40,000 worth of funding for staff cost. And that was split evenly, $20,000 between the Tidelands Fund and the Uplands Fund. So that's really the storyline for the Tidelands and the Uplands accounts. Let me come back now to the slide I have in front of you, which is capital improvements. The capital improvement program was approved as proposed. So you saw these. We really didn't have a lot of strong recommendations behind these. The storyline continues to be that the city will continue to work on those things that you see in the carryover account. So we're still actively engaged in rails and signage and lighting upgrades out at the pier. We don't have, this is an off year. So our pier parking structure, we kind of do every other year. This is one of our off years. We're going to be working on restaurant improvements. We have some funding to continue moving forward with some of the design work on the boat ramp. Sport fishing pier repairs, if we have a restriction lifted for us to start doing some planning, there's a little bit of funding of money in there. You still see the Moonstone Park. Hopefully you've seen the outdoor shower going in. So that's a project that's active right now, as well as you're all aware that the Harbor Patrol docks are moving forward through the permitting process. On the Uplands side, again, you see the harbor railing replacement, the parking structures, and some restroom improvements. So you'll still see activity. You'll still see some capital work happening out there. As I mentioned last month, the only difference here is that the city council just did not allocate new funding for this fiscal year, but we still have those carryover funds that we need to appropriate. So the recommendation for me tonight is for you to receive and file this staff report on the adopted budget and capital improvement plan. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I can always put that back up for you. One other thing I did want to make a note of is in your packet. Last month, we had a lot of discussion about internal service funds, and my goal tonight is to not have a detailed discussion about that. But what I did put into your packet is a budget response report. So I'm almost an informational item for you for now. And if there's some follow-up we need to do, we can certainly do that. But I wanted you to, if you hadn't seen it as part of the budget adoption process, to have the budget response report that was provided to the city council regarding internal service funds. There's a brief narrative there. What I think is probably the most interesting piece of information is the chronological allocation of those funds over time. And I do have that. If you want me to put it up on the screen, I can do that. But I thought that was really maybe the point that Commissioner Light was trying to make at our last meeting, was the growth of that fund and the allocation of that fund to the harbor enterprise. So wanted to make sure you had, just that as some background information. The city council did not go all the way to what you had recommended, which was a reduction of 15% of the internal service funds. They adopted the internal service fund pursuant to the formula that and how it ultimately plays itself out. So to the extent that departments were reducing their expenses and we had that flow through, which you saw on my previous slide, we did see some savings in internal service funds, but they were not at the 15% level that had been recommended by the Harbor Commission going forward. So with that, that's my goal tonight, was to just, try to give you a recap on what happened in the budget process. Happy to tackle it's been adopted now, so we can't make any changes at this point, but happy to, tackle any questions or comments you might have, maybe things we may want to think about on a going forward basis. Just wanted to make sure you had that opportunity before we move into this fiscal year and actually start working on the budget that's been approved using those fundings. So that concludes my presentation. Chair Kilroy, happy to tackle any questions that may be coming from the commissioners.
Chair Kilroy, your mic is muted.
We have questions, and I love your optimism with regards to the internal service charges. We'll see. One quick question. I don't think it was addressed. If I remember correctly, they showed a huge deficit still remaining between revenues and expenditures on Seaside Lagoon. Was that modified, changed, explained?
No, it wasn't changed. And the explanation that was offered, and I appreciate that it isn't necessarily a satisfactory explanation to you as commissioners, is that there is a fixed amount of staffing that, even though the lagoon isn't open, there are staff positions that are in part allocated to the lagoon that maybe have split responsibility. So they may have half of their work duty or 3/4 of their work duty in one location and 1/4 of their work duty allocated to the lagoon. There were some other fixed expenses, internal service funds, I think, as we talked about before, that are allocated to the lagoon, that just become a kind of almost like a built-in core expense that, even though the lagoon isn't operating at full capacity, they did not take the opportunity to say, well, gee, how could we, redistribute those expenses given that this isn't even operating for this particular year. So they remained in place. You'll still see some structural deficit as a result of that, and that structural deficit in part hits the Tidelands account.
Yeah, you'd almost have to look at a more detailed breakdown as to where those expenses are coming from.
Yeah, and when I presented your recommendation, so the Harbor Commission met on June 1st. There was a city council meeting on June 2nd and June 9th. And at one of those two meetings, I did go through your recommendations one by one of which was requesting a more detailed analysis of that deficit related to the Seaside Lagoon. It didn't get taken up by anyone. It didn't really advance much further. So we didn't have that kind of a direction to go back and do exactly what you're suggesting, Chair Kilroy, which would be a much more detailed analysis, almost line by line, what each of those things are, and is there a way to address those items in some other form or fashion.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Carlson.
Thanks. Let's see, Director. I have a question on the Harbor Enterprise Fund allocations on the bar graph that's on page 50
of the budget response report.
Yeah.
Let me grab that.
So if people have the paper packet at home, it's page 50 of that. I'm not sure.
That might be the easier way to do it.
The first page of attachment B, if that helps you at all.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's a colored bar graph.
Yep. And I will, like I said, I kind of put this packet in here with the idea being that I wanted it for background information. So I will do my best to try to answer your question, and maybe I'll have to get back to you with an answer.
Yeah. This is more of a budget question, I think, or I hope, than getting into the guts of the internal service funds. It looks like between the proposed budget and adopted budget, we're spending significantly less on liability insurance. Somehow we avoided a pretty significant increase, and we're spending less than we did last year. And on the other hand, we're seeing an increase or about the same in workers' comp. So we're doing better on liability and worse on workers' comp. And I was wondering if you knew what was going on there.
So I think maybe one, I want to make sure that we're looking at the bars in the same way. So the 2019, when you look at the two last bars,
Yep.
one of them says 1920 adopted budget. So that would have been last year's budget. And then,
okay. All right. I missed the change in year. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got it. So then the next year is 2021 proposed budget. So I think, and these are kind of hard to, these stacked bar graphs are always a little tough, but I think you're actually seeing.
I thought they were both 2021. So.
Got it. Okay. So I think you're seeing an increase both in liability insurance and I guess that's overhead is the next biggest thing. And workers' comp insurance, you're correct, is actually declining from last year's adopted budget to this year's proposed budget.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, then I see an increase in liability insurance and a decrease in workers' comp.
Yeah, and when you note, the one thing I will note is when you look at the actual spreadsheet, what they call liability and property insurance, in some ways also has liability, also includes some legal, when they use the word liability, they look at it as possible pending legal action for which the city could have responsibility. Maybe that's the best way to say it. So some of our liabilities may be pending legal matters, and that's why you see some of the increase. It's not purely premiums is really the point I want to drive home.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's it. Generally, thanks for all the work. Thanks for developing a new contract with the Falconer. Thanks for everything your staff is doing down there. I see, more tables out here and there, and I guess you're trying to work with the peer businesses and get some outdoor dining. So, thanks for doing that. It looks good. Good luck.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that as part of the director's report, but to the extent that it impacts revenue, just, we are trying to help the peer businesses in whatever way we can, get themselves open and operational and generating some revenue. And so, kind of on the heels of a discussion that was happening citywide regarding temporary use permits, we decided to piggyback onto that process and allow the peer businesses to apply for temporary use permits to put tables and chairs in some of the public areas out at the pier. And it started off slowly. I think it was maybe Quality Seafood and one other restaurant that took advantage of it. But the minute that the governor shut down indoor dining, we were flooded with applications from virtually every restaurant on the pier. And big thanks to the planning department, community development. They've been helping us process those applications as quickly as possible so people can get their tables out and hopefully get a little business for themselves while we're still sorting all of this out. So appreciate the comment.
Chair Kilroy?
Got it. Sorry. I have grandchildren crying in the background, so I keep muting myself.
Perfect.
Commissioner Light.
Thank you. Let's see. Thanks, Director Proud. That's a good report. I appreciate you putting in all the background material. Does remind me of three things, and I don't want to go into it in detail, but the first thing, when we were talking about that audit from the state basically, I forgot about this, but when I reread it, it reminded me that the state really didn't look at the uplands because they said it's beyond their control. So that is something that never really got reviewed by the state. The second was the limitations of OMB A87 guidelines, which just goes to what we've been saying. The city chooses to take sales tax and TOT taxes out of the harbor, and yet still not use that as a write-off against the ISF. So the city is double dipping in the harbor. It's getting the tax revenues that don't come back into the harbor, and then it takes money from the harbor to cover city funds. And that's the only enterprise in the city that does that. And in fact, in here it specifically kind of states it's kind of angering It says the state cannot mandate that a local tax be used for statewide or non-local uses. Therefore, the city does not need to devote local tax revenue collected or granted in the tide and submerged lands to reimburse the ISF. So it pretty much just thumbs in the face and says, yeah, we're allowed to take it, so we're gonna, and we're still gonna charge the harbor a lot of money. And then the third thing I do have a question on is that in there it does talk about the equitable redistribution of the self-insurance fund back into the tidelands, including any ISF allocations that were part of that. Are we following that?
I'm guilty of leaving myself on mute. That one is a question I would have to get back to you with Commissioner Light. So I'd have to do a little bit of homework on that and find out for you.
It's one thing I'd like to see the commission do is be successful in getting the city from double dipping in the harbor by taking out taxes and charging ISF fees. We're the only enterprise that has to do that. Thanks. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Walters.
Yes, thank you. Steve, I had some questions concerning the balance of the Uplands and Tidelands funds. I think at the last meeting you had showed some P&L, I think, for both of those funds, and we were running structural deficits for several years. Do you know or can estimate what would be the balance of the Uplands and Tidelands funds at the end of this coming budget year?
So I'm going to just dip into my mail account here for just a moment so that I can give you the accurate number. I can tell you on the Uplands account right now. So that was run, like I said, I asked our finance department if they could run me a balance sheet on that for effective, essentially the end of June, the tail end of last week. And on that particular sheet, we had a cash balance of 2.8 million. Now we will still have, since this was run on July 9th, we haven't closed our current fiscal year. So we'll still have some charges that will hit that account. Difficult to say exactly how much that will be, but suffice it to say it will be, probably in the tens of thousands, if not, over 100,000. So I could certainly see that account starting the new fiscal year, somewhere in the, 2.6, 2.5 range in terms of cash by the time everything gets accounted for into the Uplands accounts. So, definitely a situation where if we're starting somewhere, just to pick the 2.5 number, and we're looking at where we were on that negative balance, we would be, just a reminder, we're at 1.15 as our projected deficit. We could very well be close to sort of, finishing the year, with maybe about $1 million or so left in our cash account for that particular fund, the Uplands Fund. As far as the Tidelands Fund goes, that has a much healthier cash balance. We're starting the fiscal year, or the balance sheet that was run just last week, that has a cash balance of about 14.3 million. So it's in a better position to start with. Now, again, you're at 13. That'll still shrink a little bit as we go through the end of the year. So maybe it'll be $14 million or so when we get to the end of the year, and our projected deficit in that account is 1.57. So we still have some coverage there that'll help offset that projected deficit, but we certainly want to be taking steps to try to eliminate structural deficits, because remember, these are the funds that then become the sources of our capital improvement funding.
Right. So I don't know if this is unprecedented or not, but what happens when one or both funds goes negative?
It's a great question, and I haven't got an answer to that. I was actually thinking about that when I saw that fund balance on Thursday, and we were Friday, when I drove out of town. And so, and I'm going to ask that very question. I'm hopeful I don't get to that point, but I can get back to you next month and let you know. We're going to manage it to the point where we won't get to zero. I can tell you that. I think that's going to be our goal. But I don't know what would happen if for some reason we had a, significant capital expense that, an emergency or something that we had to pay for out of that account. What the case would be if we actually ran out of cash in that particular account. So I had that very same thought and just haven't had an opportunity to contact our finance department and talk that one through. But I will add that to my list of questions for you.
I would appreciate that if you can get an answer back the next meeting.
Will do.
I'm looking over my notes from last meeting. I know you mentioned 14 million in the Thailand's fund. I thought I had written down more like 7 or 8 million. I assume your number is more accurate than mine, but is that something you can verify?
I can. I can. Right now, I can tell you. I'm looking at what was sent to me last week, and what we have is it's a line item. It's called pooled cash, is what the line item is called. And in that pooled cash account for the Tidelands, we have 14.295, and in the Uplands, we have 2.810. So
okay, so that's actual cash.
Compare that against the last month's conversation and see how I may have been off a little bit there.
Okay, so that's actual cash.
That's actual cash, okay. Correct.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve.
Yes. Matt, you're muted.
Now, so they've all gone to bed, so hopefully I won't need to mute myself anymore.
I just wish she'd come back and sit on your lap. That was cute.
Yeah, she's a lot cuter to look at than I am. Anyway, is there anybody from the public that has any questions?
Actually, I only see one member of the public signed in, and the hand is not up. So if he wishes to speak, he should put his hand up. And it doesn't appear so. And there are no comments from under e-comments, sir.
Thank you very much. So do I need a motion to receive and file?
Chair Kilroy, I just wanted to confirm, Commissioner Light, is that a new hand, or is that did you already complete your comment?
That's an old hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was an old hand, but thank you.
I just wanted to share. Okay. My apologies for interrupting.
No worries. This is a work in progress, I think, as we get more used to doing things this way. I need a motion to receive and file.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And a roll call vote.
Commissioner Carlson?
Approved.
Commissioner Dalton?
Approved.
Commissioner Light?
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan?
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer?
Approve.
Commissioner Walters?
Approved.
And Chair Kilroy.
Approved.
Thank you.
And so now we are on to the director's report.
All right. So let me make sure. Multiple screens, make sure I'm not on mute. Okay, thank you very much for the director's report tonight. What I typically start out with are previous actions that the city council has taken. The first thing I had on my list, which Captain Hoffman covered, was the Redondo Beach Police Department's MOU with Manhattan Beach PD for the participation in the Marine Enforcement Unit. So I think he covered that pretty well for you. On the 16th of June, the city council adopted the budget. There was also a consent item for the approval of a license agreement with an organization called Sports Camp Management. You've probably seen them out on the pier the last few summers. They run a skate camp and some other activities. They haven't been able to get up and running, even though the license was approved, just because of the restrictions related to COVID. So we may still see them out there at some point. They have a license agreement that takes them through September 4th. So hopefully they'll be able to get maybe a couple of weeks in of skate camp. And then, as I mentioned in my report regarding the budget, there was a consent item approved, which was the amendment with On the Wings Falconry for the reduced flying time of 2 days a week. And we also went ahead and extended that contract through to June 30th of 2021, just to align it better with the city's fiscal calendar. As I also mentioned, that contract was for about $57,000. And they're going to be out there on their flying program Hopefully you'll see them starting either the week of the 18th or July 18th or the 25th. It's a little dependent upon the Falconer's schedule. I think he was perhaps going to be in Alaska on a previously planned vacation. So depending on when he returns, he'll be back out there flying the Falconers. We do have a few items coming up for the City Council's considerations, pretty much some housekeeping items. They are consents to amendments. Bob Resnick on the Redondo Beach Landing has some amendments to some of his subleases that he needs the consent of the council for. So that'll be coming before the City Council. And then if you're tracking the process of the appointments to the boards and commissions, it's tomorrow night, the City Council will be holding their City Council meeting, and as part of that meeting, they will be doing their interviews for the commissioners. Just as a reminder, the process is that they conduct the applicant interviews, and then the council members themselves can submit recommendations for appointments to the mayor. The mayor then makes his appointments known at a regular City Council meeting, which right now is tentatively planned to be Tuesday, August 18th. And then those appointments are either affirmed by the City Council or not. And if they are affirmed, then they get reappointed or appointed at the City Council meeting of Tuesday, September 1st. So that process is underway, and the City Council will be holding those interviews tomorrow night. So that's the activities, both past and present, coming up with the City Council. Just some miscellaneous follow-up items. I think you know that we were closed down entirely for the 4th of July. The beaches were closed. The fireworks show didn't happen. It was, sadly, the directive regarding some of the indoor restaurant dining activities came down right before the 4th of July. So the new order was in place for the restaurants. Some of them were able to quickly adapt to that, but the municipal pier portion of the pier was closed as part of those orders. We did leave the garage open, although it was very, very quiet in terms of garage traffic. We looked at some of our traffic counts, and we were at 10% or so of what we had seen the previous year in terms of revenues and transactions that were conducted inside of the parking garage. So definitely a slow weekend for us. Interestingly enough, though, 19 of the moorings were booked for the weekend. So for the mooring field, there was a little bit of activity out there. Moving on to some of our tenant items, we are, as I mentioned as part of my budget report, we are still challenged with tenants being able to pay their rent. We have been able to offer rent deferrals for tenants. We started that in the month of April. We've been able to, with the council's blessing, defer April, May, June, and July. So our intent is that with the August 1st rent payment, that the businesses will be back onto their rent schedule. Now, I say that with the understanding that the last time I talked to the City Council about this matter was in June in closed session, and then July, the governor closed down the indoor dining options for the restaurants and restricted their ability to collect revenue. So we'll likely have that on the City Council's closed session again for next week to talk to them to make sure that we're still moving forward with a August rent collection schedule. The governor today announced another round of closures for the affected counties. His new round of closures, I don't think does anything more drastic than what he had previously done to the pier. So I think we're still looking at, restrictions on dine-in and having outdoor dining or takeout still be the option. And that was scheduled to run for 3 weeks. So hopefully we'll see that lifted. As I mentioned earlier, that's caused a rush of people who are seeking temporary use permits for outdoor seating. And as of last Friday, we had approved 4 temporary use permits. That's Quality Seafood, the Slip, El Torito, and Kincaid's. There are another 6 applications under review by the planning department that we're working through those right now. Some of those include El Baja Chef, Tony's, some other locations, and then we have 4 other applications that are out to the tenants for them to complete and send back to us. So if all of those were to make their way through the approval process, we'd have 14 different establishments down at the pier taking advantage of this temporary use permit process. I think I've mentioned to you previously that we have lost 3 tenants. Polly's has given us their notice that they intend to vacate in November. Mystical Joy, who was on a month-to-month basis, has submitted her notice for her business. And then there was a small tenant up on Pier Plaza called Two Talk that was also on a month-to-month basis that submitted their notification that they wouldn't be going forward with their lease. So we're still, really seeing the effects of this COVID-19 and having us slip back a little bit into some new restrictions and new closures is definitely going to have an additional financial impact on us. Moving on, we've had this on our list of summer holidays and events. We're going to have a peer association meeting on Thursday to talk about this, but I think the consensus among the peer association from some of the email traffic that I've seen is that we are just going to simply have to, at this point, face the reality and recognize that we were hoping against all hope that maybe we could preserve a portion of the summer concert series. I think that's not going to happen. We had moved our family movies at the pier from June to September. I think that's not going to happen. So we're sadly going to be losing our special events calendar for the summer, and which again just further exacerbates the issue for some of our local businesses down there. I did mention that Seaside Lagoon is closed until further notice. We don't see that reopening for public use. It's going to mostly be for private parties, special events, once those are able to occur under the COVID-19 restrictions. Repair work, there has been some work, and we've tried to take advantage of some of the closures to get that work underway. Some of it bled into some of the reopening a little bit. What probably most notable were the concrete deck on the Horseshoe Pier. We did some work out there. We had to turn the power off to lower some of the vaults in the area there about a week or so ago, but that work is coming to a conclusion. And then we are working on structural repairs. Part of the garage repair program included structural repairs to the storage room that's underneath that. There's a storage area that's underneath the substation down there at the pier. So we're doing some structural repairs to that area right now. So that's what I have. We don't obviously have any upcoming events programmed. As of right now, I don't have any pressing issues for your August commission meeting, but we'll see what materializes over the next few weeks before the August meeting. So with that concludes my director's report, and I'm happy to tackle any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like right now I don't have any questions. Or the commissioners don't have any questions. Going once? Going twice? All right, well, if there's no questions, then I guess we will move on to referrals to staff.
So, Chair Kilroy, two things. One, we need to take public comment on the director's report. And in light of that, I do want to thank Mark. I did send him an email asking him, the city clerk's office is trying to, as you can tell, modify our online process to allow people to register in advance of the meeting so that they can sign in and provide comments. And so I did ask Mark if he would be our guinea pig tonight and see if he could take the system for a test drive and maybe give us some feedback so that we can start to work out the kinks. I know the clerk's office is going to try to implement this program for the city council meeting that's coming up. So I do appreciate Mark taking the time to sign in and offer his thoughts.
It gives us a little bit more normality knowing that Mark's here. So given that, do we have any public comment?
Well, Mr. Hanson has not raised his hand to speak on this item, and there are no e-comments submitted, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Do I have any motions that I need to make?
Just to receive and file the director's report, sir.
There we go. Motion to receive and file the director's report.
So moved. Second.
So a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Carlson? Did I hear an aye? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Dalton?
Approved.
Commissioner Light?
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan?
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Bauer?
Approved.
Commissioner Walters?
Approve.
And Chair Kilroy?
Approved.
Thank you.
All right. So now we're on to referrals to staff. So I am going to go in the order that you guys are looking at me on my screen, and I don't know how that relates to the list on the right, but what the heck. Mr. Callahan.
Nothing. Thank you.
Mr. Carlson.
No referrals, thanks.
Mr. Walters.
Just a question I had earlier, Steve, relating to the funds, and also we can get a updated financial summary for both funds in the next meeting that's updated with the current budget projections and everything. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Light.
Nothing else. Thank you.
Commissioner Bauer.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Commissioner Dalton.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
All right. And yep. So nothing for me. Shoot, I didn't print out the whole agenda, but I guess I'll take a motion to adjourn to the next scheduled meeting of the Redondo Beach Harbor Commission. Do we have a date?
August 10th.
Of August 4th. So
August 10th. 10th.
The 10th. That sounds right. So if I could have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to. Oh, second.
And could I have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Carlson?
Approved.
Commissioner Dalton?
Approved.
Commissioner Light?
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan?
Approve.
Commissioner Bauer?
Approve.
Commissioner Walters?
Approve.
And Chair Kilroy?
Approved.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much for suffering my ins and outs of running a Zoom meeting. And stay safe out there.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.